Merry Christmas. Welcome to today's episode as we do the 12 days of nutrients. We appreciate you tuning in. We hope the holiday season's upon you. Hope you've got a little shopping done, or maybe you're finishing up. Hope you found your favorite Christmas shirt. Today we've got the red truck and the Christmas tree. We're very fond of that. And we do love this Christmas season. We do love going through the 12 days of nutrients. Today, we're going to talk about calcium. Calcium is something that for some reason, everybody thinks they know a lot about, and there's a lot of misinformation that I hear being bantered about on a regular basis. It makes me very uncomfortable. But let's dive in here, looking at the roles of the essential nutrients. What do they have to say? They say, well, it is utilized for continuous cell division and formation, and we've been told for years and years and years that it's cell wall structure. And when that baby plant is going through the cell division, and one cell becomes 2, and 2 become 4, and 4 become 8, and 8 becomes 16. What happens if just 2 or 3 of those cell walls rupture and that cell doesn't get to divide? It slows us down way up front, because when it's okay, we go to you go 16 to 32 to 64, 128, 256, and then the numbers start getting really big. And losing one up front costs us a bunch on the back side. We know it's involved in nitrogen metabolism, so if we want to be more efficient in using our nitrogen, calcium is going to be very important. We know that calcium reduces plant respiration. Adequate calcium will help us not lose so much moisture to that plant respiration. It's going to aid in translocating the photosynthesis from the leaves into the fruiting organs, and therefore it's going to increase fruit set. We know that it is really essential to develop the nut development in peanuts. And guys, here's the big one. It stimulates microbial activity. And we're going to spend some time on that. We're going to come back to that here in the very near future. The first thing I want to do is go to the Western Fertilizer Handbook, because they will talk about the different things that what are the symptoms of a calcium deficient plant. Number 1, the growing point or the terminal bud will die under severe deficiency. Margins of the effective leaves, usually the younger ones, have a scalloped appearance, and foliage is not so affected foliage not so affected as what happens is it usually gets an abnormally dark green. There is a tendency for the plant to shed its blossoms and buds prematurely. Guys, we're going to have a hard time hanging on to flowers and soybeans if we're short on calcium. It has a lot to do with weakening the stem structure. And guys, here's what we know. How many of you in the seed corn industry, when we were working there, we called it whips. It was when the tassels didn't open up. I think now of course, everything has to be a syndrome. So they called it some kind of a syndrome where it didn't unwrap. And I'm not saying that a lack of calcium was that, but I am saying I know from my past days working in seed corn production that where we had fields that were calcium deficient, a lot of times those tassels would stay wrapped up really tight, and they'd keep 2, 3, 4 leaves around them way too long, way too long. And that was never, ever our friend. I did some research looking through some articles on the internet, which I found very interesting. And I just want to share some of this with you, because we've seen headlines in farm magazines that said, you can't afford to lime, that pH doesn't matter. And I want to draw a distinction here, because pH is not necessarily an indicator of what we need for calcium. For instance, we know that when we apply high mag lime, the pH goes up. And if we already have too much magnesium, we can raise our pH with a dolomitic lime. However, what's going to happen there is we're going to not have enough available calcium. We can have a pH of 8.5 because we have a lot of sodium in our soils. And guess what? You look at it and some people come and they say, hey, your pH is 8.5. You definitely don't want to lime. Wrong answer. Actually, you may have to lime in order to drive some of that sodium off in order to get that pH to actually come down and to be able to grow anything there. So we can't confuse pH and calcium necessarily. Sometimes, yes, if we have a low pH, we do put on calcium probably, or calcium and magnesium, depending on what we have, that we need. But it is important to understand that one does not necessarily mutually exclude or mutually include the other. This was very interesting work that I found here. Calcium significantly impacts soil bacteria by improving soil structure and altering microbial communities. Now, before I launch off into that, I want to share something else with you. I didn't get it printed, but I have it here, and I want to read this to you. Guys, we're going to talk about the 12 days of nutrients, but what I don't spend a lot of time in, and we need to be very cognizant of, is that carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen are critically important to a corn plant. As a matter of fact, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen make up about 94 to 95% of the dry weight of that plant. And they form the structural backbone for all of your organic compounds like sugars, starches, proteins, and fiber, essential for energy and growth. Now, a lot of that carbon will come from the air in the form of CO2, or it will come from the hydrogen and oxygen from water, H2O. And while usually abundant, good water management and soil health are the key to ensuring sufficient availability, as deficiencies in water or CO2 can limit the growth even with adequate fertilizer. So we have to be aware of the fact that all these other things that we're doing impact 5 to 6% of that plant in the final stages. Only 5 to 6. So the question becomes, what is it that we can do using the plant essential nutrients to impact the carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen? And I want to really pay attention here because, guys, we want to be doing this correctly, and sometimes we're looking for magic bullets, and what we really need is just fundamentals. That's the bottom line, is good fundamentals. Calcium significantly impacts soil bacteria by improving soil structure, altering microbial communities, and boosting carbon sequestration. It promotes beneficial microbes. It enhances organic matter breakdown efficiency. It increases the carbon use efficiency. It helps retain carbon in the soil, thereby reducing CO2 release and making a healthier, more productive soil. Guys, as we're trying to make sure we're managing our carbon correctly, calcium is key, absolutely key to doing that. It's going to alter those microbial communities, and calcium shifts the type of bacteria present, favoring those forms that form networks and those that perform beneficial functions. It enhances organic matter recycling. It makes the microbes more efficient at breaking down plant litter. That is leading to more carbon being incorporated into the microbial biomass in soil rather than escaping as CO2 into the atmosphere. It promotes carbon sequestration. By changing microbial activity, calcium helps stabilize organic matter, effectively trapping carbon in the soil for longer periods of time. It improves soil structure and adhesion. Calcium helps mediate interactions between minerals and organic compounds, improving soil aggregation and microbial adhesion to the surfaces which affect the colonization. It also increases carbon use efficiency. Bacteria use carbon more efficiently, meaning less is lost as CO2. And it does support specific bacteria, and it encourages the calcite dissolving bacteria that can make calcium more available, acting as a natural biofertilizer source. Calcium is soil's secret weapon. That's the headline of an article, and I'm not going to share it with you, but just let me say this. In 2023, in December, there was a study released from Cornell and Purdue University that found that adding calcium to the soil helped increase carbon sequestration. Guys, if we're going to maintain and hold on to all that carbon, that's really important that we have this calcium in our soils correct. We're going to talk about what correct is here in a little bit. Soil pH also, again, can be separate from calcium, but soil pH really influences bacterial growth. Generally favoring neutral to slightly acidic conditions. Somewhere between 6 and 7.5 is where the most bacteria thrive. Acidic soils or low pHs suppress bacterial activity, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is not good because those bacteria help create more carbon. Again, the optimum range is 6.0 to 7.5. That supports high bacteria numbers that are crucial for organic matter decomposition and nutrient release. As the pH drops below 6, bacterial growth declines significantly, becoming limited by factors like aluminum toxicity, and we all have plenty of aluminum in our soils. That's why keeping that pH above 6 is really important, because that keeps the aluminum from tying up all kinds of stuff and from smoking our bacteria. It also, causes nutrient deficiencies, and so those are things that we don't want to happen. Those are just some easy finds, guys. You can do a little research on your own. It's not going to be difficult to come up with a whole list of things here, ladies and gentlemen, to show you why calcium is critical. And oftentimes we need to address the calcium before we do anything else. As we take a look into the Midwest Handbook here, I'll just share briefly out of here what they say. First of all, total calcium in the soil ranges from less than 0.1 to 25%. So somewhere between 0.1% and 25%. Obviously, those soils in the arid west have the highest levels, while the acidic soils in the humid southeast have the lowest. Not all of the total calcium in the soil is available for the crops. We know that quite well. This nutrient is important in the role of fertility. Some plants, such as alfalfa, clovers, and certainly leafy vegetables, require large amounts of calcium. Plants of these types thrive best when the predominant base in the soil is calcium. If other bases, such as magnesium, potassium, or sodium, are present in amounts equal to or higher than calcium, nutritional disturbances can occur. It is associated with the development of protein. It assists in root development. Again, we're coming back. We put on too much nitrogen, we depress the calcium there, and we don't put on enough phosphorus, so now we have a lack of calcium and we have a lack of phosphorus, and we don't get the root development. We just get a lot of vegetative growth, and that is never a healthy combination. It also moves the carbohydrates in the plant. It's needed for cell wall formation. We just keep coming back to that over and over and over. Out of the Fertilizer Handbook from the Fertilizer Institute, applying lime to bring soil pH in the proper range for optimum plant growth usually supplies sufficient calcium. Root growth of most crops depends on a supply of calcium and the proper pH in the root zone. Guys, figure out how life works. Get on the right side of it. We need the right amount of calcium and the right pH in that root zone to let those roots flourish. That's really important. Liming also reduces the solubility and possible toxicity of aluminum. That's kind of a big deal too. Therefore, the indirect effects of applying lime to a soil are as significant as for the crops as the direct role of supplying the plant nutrient calcium. So not only do we need to get that calcium into that plant as a nutrient, but having the proper pH and the proper calcium improves the soil structure and impacts a whole bunch of other things, and that's really important also. Going into Donald Schrieffer's book here, From the Soil Up, I really like reading that. Obviously, I've read this to the point, guys, where the book is literally falling apart, as you can see. We're going to have to get a new one and start over on this, but I appreciate the work that he has done. He says the soil colloid will always be completely filled with cations. There won't be a void there. There won't be a vacuum. When cations are removed and not replaced, hydrogen moves in to fill the negative sites once occupied by the other cations, such as calcium, magnesium, and potassium. As the calcium, magnesium, potassium leave the soil colloid, hydrogen fills the void, and the soil becomes increasingly acid and less productive. We believe crop production failure is caused more by a lack of nutrients rather than because the soil pH becomes lower. In other words, the fact that the pH is low keeps the nutrients from getting into the plant, and that's what's actually causing the problem there in regards to the yield decrease. Pure calcium carbonate has 40% calcium, and pure magnesium carbonate has 28% magnesium. Limestones are often rated according to their neutralizing power. Magnesium carbonate will neutralize more soil acid than an equal amount of calcium carbonate. So dolomitic limestone will always have a higher neutralizing value than calcium carbonate limestone. That's a cheat because we can put on dolomitic lime, and the pH will go up faster. If we're just trying to fix pH, the question becomes, do we have that right ratio in our soils? In other words, is it about 1 to 4? And a lot of times here at my own farm, we have tremendously high mag levels. It's something that we fight. Our base saturation, we work to keep it under the 18, and when we started, we were trying to keep it under 22. There's a lot of things that go into this, and guys, that's really important, getting the correct form of the lime. And again, the pH is going to radically affect what happens in the way of nutrient availability. We would really like to see in parts per million that about 1 part mag for every 4 parts calcium. And anytime that gets higher than that, when we get into that 2 to 4 or 3 to 4, we've got some problems. And we want to make sure that we're doing the right things. They're putting the right lime on in our quest to fix our pH. As noted earlier, magnesium should be about 25% of the correct calcium levels on any given soil. This would give us that 1 to 4 ratio. He just comes back and hits that multiple times here in the book. Our sample problem points out the importance of using the CEC to determine calcium and magnesium needs. And I talked about using your CEC to determine your potassium needs also. Why? Because they're all cations, right? So if we use a 10 CEC soil sample, if we had used a 5 soil sample, the calcium and limestone needs would have been reduced because the pantry would be half as large. In other words, you could only hold half as much. This too points out why liming by a pH alone simply has little basis for logic. Very little basis for logic. For instance, in a high sodium soil, you could have a pH of 8.0 or higher, but you could still be low in calcium. That 8 plus pH would be no reason to ignore the need to apply more calcium. Reading from the book that Neil has of Hands-on Agronomy, he started off right up front on page 3 to jump right into this. He talked about when they cleared land where he was at and they took out timber and they started growing soybeans. The first year they had about a 50 bushel yield. The next year it would be about 40, and the year after that it would go down to 30, which is where it generally stayed. When analyzed for pH, P, and K in the soil, the audits all showed that there was nothing wrong, that everything was fine. pH, P, and K looked good. But they didn't check for the other nutrients in the soil, and the fact was they were low in calcium. Once they applied the calcium, the beans get back to where they were in the first place. You are losing out because calcium is what puts all the other nutrients into that plant. Okay? So calcium is going to help our bacteria, calcium is going to help our fungi, and calcium is going to put the nutrients into those plants that we need. And so therefore, we want to make sure that we've got the right amount of calcium out there. When we apply limestone and mix it with the soil, we have a mixture which is only partially ready to support a good crop. Not until the calcium and magnesium in the limestone have disintegrated and become part of the colloidal complex through the base exchange reactions does the growing crop benefit from the calcium and mag in the limestone. If the limestone is applied to the soil and the ground remains dry, the limestone remains ineffective. If the limestone is too coarse, it may be not very effective. And so we want to make sure that we're getting, when we're buying our lime, that we've got stuff that's going through at least a 60 mesh screen. I looked at a lime test the other day, and 0% of the lime would go through a 60 mesh screen. I told him, I said, that's the stuff I put in my barn to pack down for, and then put bedding on top of for our cattle, is those chips. That's not how we want to do that. He goes on here. A higher percent base saturation of mag in a soil does not necessarily mean that that nutrient is more available. It is possible to get to the point where the percent of magnesium, as it goes up, actually makes magnesium less available to the plant. Here, the optimum base saturation of the cations for most soils is calcium should be 60 to 70 of the saturation in the soil. In other words, 60% of the minerals attached to the soil colloid should be calcium. On a heavy soil, 70% would be optimum. The correct number for magnesium should be between 10 and 20. Those are things that we need to be looking at to make sure that we've got those where they need to be. I see so many things here. It's funny because in 33 years, I've seen so many things coming. I'm so old in this business that I can remember going to the very first commodity classic when they combined the soybean growers and the NCGA into one platform. And we went out there, and back in that time, there must have been 50 or 60 chemical companies. And it was always entertaining to walk through because they actually were not very nice to each other. They would say terrible things about one another. And like I said, there was 50 or 60 of them. And so there was a lot of backbiting going on. And over the course of the next 10 years, as I watched that consolidation happen, and guys that once upon a time were standing in separate booths talking how horrible the people in the booth next to them were all had their arms around each other and they were singing Kumbaya because they were all working for the same company. As I've watched all of that unfold, I've watched the deal unfold here I saw people come through. We had a deal that burnt through the countryside, and their deal was you just get an 85% calcium-based saturation rate no matter what. That's all that matters. There are no one nutrient fixes. I had a gentleman come to me at a Farm Progress show. I was standing in Manna, Iowa, and this gentleman came in and he was in a lot of trouble. He had never got his base saturation rate up to 85%. And the people that were talking, be careful who you let inside your ear and inside your head. And the people that he was listening to said, just keep putting on 6 tons of lime every year, every year, every year. And while he couldn't get his base saturation rate where he thought he needed it, he did manage to take his pH from 6.5 to 8.6. And now all of a sudden his yields are starting to tank. And it put him in a great deal of problems. And then the situation is it takes a long time to get, 6 tons a year for multiple years, guys. That's going to slowly release over and over. And I never did get to talk to him to see how that deal turned out. But we don't want to do these things that are one nutrient fixes because that's never going to be the answer. Lime will react in 1 to 3 years when the particle size allows at least 60% to go through a 100 mesh screen. That's what we're looking at. We really would like to see 60% of our lime go through a 100 mesh screen. What passes through an 8 mesh screen will provide about a 10% breakdown over the same 3-year period. From a 20 mesh screen, there's about a 40% breakdown, and from a 60 mesh screen, about a 75% breakdown. But if 60 to 100% goes through that 100 mesh screen, that means you've got about 100% availability over the next 3 years. That's why paying attention to that is so incredibly important, because what mesh screen it goes through changes everything. We need to be careful, according to Neil, and with our calcium levels. He says that the day you get a calcium up to an 85% base saturation, 90% of the available iron will be complexed and will be locked up just like it's in a vault. With base saturations below 80%, greater nutrient availability will result. And guys, we know that anytime we have a shortage of potassium, manganese, and copper, a weak stock is going to be observed. And we know 2 things that work on that. We know too much nitrogen ties up the copper beyond the shadow of a doubt. And we know that too much calcium on the other side of it will tie up all of the nutrients. And we don't want to be doing that. I'm going to share just a short story with you that I've never shared before, but I think that this is really, really important. Reading as him, I consulted on a corporate farm that was owned by 2 families. They had 2,300 acres, and they were told that they couldn't put on too much lime. They applied 6 tons to the acre because the location was in southern Illinois, and there's lots of acidic soils in that part of the state. They had a field that couldn't be treated because there was a ditch there, and they couldn't get across it in the fall. They piled lime on one side of the ditch. They couldn't go over to the other side until spring. In the spring, of course, they didn't get it spread. I came on the scene a year later in the fall to analyze their soils. Where the limestone was piled, you couldn't tell it was intended to be applied to the other field. When I saw the results, I knew why they hired me. All of that soil was 81, 82, 84, and 85% calcium. Magnesium was tied up, potassium was tied up, except for that one little field back there behind the woods, which was right on the money. Actually, none of their acres needed limestone. Guys, this is why we soil test. We don't just go put on P or K or calcium, lime, whatever it is. We do a soil test to see what it says. They told me that the soybeans were their best crop, and they were taking 45 to 50 bushels of soybeans per acre before the fatal limestone application. Within 2 years of applying that limestone, they were down to 30 bushel of beans per acre. The reason the yield dropped was they tied up the magnesium and the potassium. Once this was understood, work was started to get that calcium out, and the farmer could return to superior yields. Coming out of life and the anatomy of life and energy in agriculture. And I've got a little tip for all of you who, I know there's some people follow us that don't farm. For you homeowners, I've got a tip I'm going to give you here at the end of this. Calcium determines the volume of the crop and is the major element against which the other nutrients react to release energy. It is a major constituent in all cell membranes. It is nature's detoxifier, meaning it has a great capacity for neutralizing toxicities, either via transmutation or chemical physical bonding. The reason calcium is overlooked centers on the lack of knowledge about pH. It is taught that the soil pH relates directly to the need for liming. That's not true, which is the term given for the application of dry calcium compound or product. People with important sounding titles and degrees persuade farmers who do not know the technical jargon of calcium requirements that are determined by the soil by its pH. Again, not true. At the lower calcium levels, which we have in America today, greater volumes of acid fertilizers must be applied to achieve a given volume. The catch is that volume is achieved via this practice is not synonymous with quality, as is proven by the current use of chemicals for insect and disease control. What's he saying? He's saying that we're not paying enough attention. We don't understand when and where to put on calcium. But he's also saying that it is a vicious cycle. When we put on fertilizers that burn calcium out, and then we don't have enough calcium, we have to put on more fertilizers, which burns out more calcium. Guys, this is a vicious cycle. I was sitting with some new friends out in Ohio at lunch this week, and we were talking about the fact that, unfortunately, in the United States, there's not much money in wellness. There's money in hiding symptoms. There's money in fixing things, not curing things. Those are two different deals. And that's whether it's in our personal health and the health of our livestock or the health of our soil. The money is not in health. It's in fix. And so what we're looking for is cure. And so we want to make sure that we're doing the right thing here. And as we start looking for shortcuts, well, you don't need to apply calcium, you don't need to apply lime, you don't need to do anything, because this will circumvent and show you how to get around that. But the fact is, when we get the pH right and we get the calcium levels right, everything else works better. Everything from the soil bacteria to the carbon sequestration to the management of CO2 to getting all the nutrients into the plant. I get people, they come to us and they say, show me a soil test, say, what do you think we ought to do here? And honestly, guys, sometimes the first money they need to spend is not with us. We don't sell lime. But if we're going to be successful, we're going to have to apply lime. We're going to have to get our calcium right. If we have too much calcium, we're going to have to learn that. We are going to have to farm around. So here's your tip. Whether you're out in the farm and you're trying to keep that lawn looking nice, trying to keep the wife happy, or you're trying to live in town and you're spraying every 3 weeks for dandelions, check this out. Dandelions are a common weed in lawns and fields. They are a red light signal of the following sequential nutrition deficiencies in this order: calcium, phosphate, vitamin A, and iron. If you will correct those deficiencies, dandelions will disappear. What am I saying? If you want rid of your dandelions, take a soil test. And when you take the soil test, we'll send it into Midwest Labs and let them tell us what do we need to do here to get that soil where it needs to be. And we can cut down on the use of pesticides in our attempt to get rid of the much dreaded dandelion. For those of you who love dandelions, that's cool. Keep your soil acidic and don't put on any phosphorus. you're good to go. All right, because I know there are some of you who like a good dandelion salad, and I'm not judging that whatsoever. I think there are probably some health benefits from it. I'm just going to have to pass on that one. Guys, as we do these 12 days of nutrients, the whole purpose is the design to bring you information that will help you make better decisions. We are not fans of broadcast fertilizer, but we talked about in regards to phosphorus, if you're going to broadcast, why triple super is probably not your best choice. We are not fans of broadcast potassium, but if we're going to broadcast, we know that potassium sulfate is a far superior product to potassium chloride. We would encourage you to do that. We are not fans of anhydrous, but we know that if we're going to do it, it's a lot better for you, the grower, to apply it in the spring and be judicious in the amount that you use. In regards to this thing about calcium, I just want everyone to be eyes wide open so that you're aware of what you need to do, so that because using the right calcium and having your pH as correct as you can get it will make everything else in your life better. And I think that's what we're looking for, is better. So guys, we want to thank you for tuning in. We hope you're having a great Christmas season. If you'd be interested in this, we're going to be on the road. I was talking to my brother today, and in the month of December, we're going to cover over 3,000 miles. We were in, but I didn't go. The team was in Mississippi there in late November. But in the month of December, we'll get about 3,000 miles. I woke up Friday morning in downtown beautiful Dublin, Ohio. I wake up Monday morning in downtown beautiful Sioux City, Iowa. And then from there, we'll be in Kearney, and we'll be in Madison, Wisconsin, and we'll be in Bettendorf. And if you'd like to get to one of those programs, reach out. Text Karen, 641-91912, or excuse me, I'm sorry, 641-919-5570, and say, hey, Karen, I would really like to go to a Fundamentals of Agronomy. Or send us a message here, a direct message on the Facebook page, and someone will get a hold of you guys quickly. We appreciate you guys very much. We hope to see you at Fundamentals of Agronomy really soon. We thank you for tuning in, and we really do hope you're going to have a blessed Christmas, and we really do hope you're having a better day.